Lori Lightfoot stunned, I think, a lot of political observers by not even making the runoff in last night's Chicago mayoral election. In fact, Lori Lightfoot came in third, which is pretty brutal for somebody who swept in. I went back and actually looked at the coverage after she won election. It was a lot of press gushing about the first Black female, openly gay Chicago mayor ever to be elected. Had so many problems during the pandemic, and then potentially associated problems with crime, although some crime is
associated with crime, for sure.
Although some continues to go up. Some crime is down. Homicides, for instance, were down last year, but some crimes...
carjackings are down. Still a huge problem in Chicago, but down.
Right, but theft, robberies, burglaries still increasing in Chicago, and she had so many different fights just in the style of Chicago politics. Lori Lightfoot was getting into all kinds of... She had initially... There's another interesting thing that I was reading in some retrospectives on her time in the mayor's office. She had a great quote about how she was offended when somebody compared her to Rahm Emanuel back in the day, and then when she became mayor was just as pugnacious, but perhaps not with the same rhyme or reason that Rahm Emanuel or other Chicago politicians were, and just seemed to be picking fights almost arbitrarily left and right. You might remember the really long Chicago Teachers Union strike. Lori Lightfoot, by the way, came out of a background where she hadn't been in elected office before. She had experience on the police board. Her opponent, who won, actually, who came in first, let alone second, the first place opponent of hers was endorsed by the local police union. I mean, you have a good take on this, and I'm curious to hear it, but just what a fall from grace.
Right, and so this is going to set up a general election that pits a guy, Paul Vallas, who has the support of the police and has called himself more a Republican than a Democrat, though he's technically registered as a Democrat.
Right.
Basically as right-wing as you can get in Chicago and still be considered viable, against what arguably would be the most progressive mayor like Chicago's ever had, perhaps going back to Harold Washington, which is an eerily similar situation in which there was a divided field that allowed Harold Washington, who was a DSA member, and a powerful member of Congress, to sneak through with less than 50% of the vote, make it into the runoff, and then the Democratic machine. And my book actually kind of starts out. My last book actually starts out kind of with this race. The Democratic machine sides with the Republican, who in this case was an actual Republican, not just a kind of sort of Republican.
Right.
And he only ended up winning by a couple thousand votes, but he did win.
Right.
And so the question then becomes, where do the centrists go? We faced this question in Los Angeles with the Caruso versus Karen Bass race. Karen Bass is not quite as progressive as Brandon Johnson. Brandon Johnson, kind of up and down movement, progressive, comes from a classroom. It comes from the kind of United Working Families, which is a WFP kind of branch out in Chicago, with the support of DSA out in Chicago, which is an undertold story. Just like DSA has had and WFP have had a ton of success in New York City, they've had probably even more success in organizing constituencies in Chicago, and this is a direct product of that organizing work. And so the question will be: do the centrists go with the Republican-ish Trump guy? Or do the centrists say, no, we're Team Blue, and that Brandon Johnson might be too progressive for us, but we'd rather have him than the Republican light. So, it's going to be a real contest. Except Caruso collapsed at the end. So you could have a tight race that totally breaks Johnson's way, or you could have a tight race down to the wire.
So there are so many votes on the table. About 17% of people cast their ballots for Lori Lightfoot, so that's as opposed to 20% for Brandon Johnson and 33.8%, about 34% for Paul Vallas. Now, Chuy Garcia, he's at 13%. Willie Wilson is at 9.5%.
Right.
So you add those two up, and that's more votes than Lori Lightfoot, but also more than Brandon Johnson. So
Right.
it's not even just the simple math of where the Lightfoot votes will go. There are a lot of candidates down ballot, at least these two, and then you end up from the 9.5% that Wilson got to 2.1% for Jamal Green. Still significant in a tight race where those votes go. So my theory of the case is basically that Lori Lightfoot, interestingly, was kind of elected as whatever people want to call it, wokeness, cancel culture was starting to peak in this country. She was a little high in her own supply, felt really good because got lots and lots of media coverage. And the way she governed was, let's say, I'm trying to think of the right word here, arrogant maybe. There was a hubris to the way that she decided to govern. Then I think actually even surprised people and caught them off guard. Just the fights that she would pick, it seemed to have no clear political logic or reasoning behind them, fumbled even on race issues, and it did not go well for her. Chicago's a really tough city to navigate, obviously, let alone during a pandemic, and there are a lot of national problems that contributed to the tensions and issues she faced in Chicago. Certainly, there's no question about it. But I also don't want to downplay, I think, the spectacular lack of political talent that Lori Lightfoot ultimately demonstrated.
And Representative Chuy Garcia, actually a Howard Washington supporter back in the day. So there's something generational, too, here, because you could have imagined a world where the progressives all coalesced behind Chuy. But instead, Brandon kind of out-organized him and out-energized him. I suspect almost all of Chuy's support goes to Brandon Johnson. He'll get at least half of Wilson, half of Lori Lightfoot. So I think he has the kind of upper hand. It's amazing, and last point, and then we'll move to the student debt thing. It's amazing to think about how much of our national politics kind of flows through and originates in Chicago. Like Stephen Douglas, Lincoln, the Daily Machine, stealing it for John F. Kennedy, then Harold Washington, then Barack Obama, Rahm Emanuel. Chicago gets overlooked a lot in our national politics, but it probably has more influence on our politics than any other city. So I think that makes this insurgency that we're witnessing much more relevant because we keep being told that now the left is in retreat. And it's like, well, what just happened? Brandon Johnson might become the next mayor of Chicago.
Especially if all those Garcia votes go to him, that puts him at the same, literally would put him at the exact same 33% as Vallis.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.